So it's time for us to add notifiers to allow the sword to actually deal damage. Now this is just one solution in implementing this. We could be running traces off of the sword and checking what it's stabbing against, but because this is a rather simple game, I'm simply going to do an overlap check at the end of a cut and see if I'm currently overlapping any enemies. If I am, I'm going to deal damage to them. So to do that, I need to go ahead and open up the animation montage and add some notifiers. So essentially a notify is something that calls an event within your animation blueprint. So when this is open, I'm going to stop for a second and I'm going to get the timeline, and I'm going to first off just put the timeline roughly where I want damage to occur in the event of an attack. I think right here would be really good. So I'm going to put the scrub there so I can see where it is, and I'm going to right click on the notifies track down the very bottom and click add notify, new notify, and I'm going to call this attack, deal damage from sword. It's a super verbose one, but that's okay. So I've added that there, and now I'm going to go through and I'm also going to add that to the other cut. So I'm going to go to here, and I feel like that would be really good at about this position. So I'm going to right click, add notify, and you'll see that deal damage from sword is available now as an option. So I'm going to click on that. Now, with those in place, what I'm actually able to do is go to the animation blueprint. And within the animation blueprint, I can go to the event graph. Within here, I'm able to actually go ahead and set up what to do when that notify is called. So if I right click and I type in deal damage, you'll notice that we have event anim notify deal damage from sword. And this essentially means that when that attack goes through, this is going to get called. So that's really good for us because we can actually go ahead and, as before, we can try to get the pawn owner. And this time we cast to a character base. So if the pawn owner is a character base, the one that we've set up, we're then also going to see if they have a weapon. So we're going to go get weapon, and I can right click on this and do a validated get, which means if they do have a weapon, we can now call a function on it. So the reason that's really good for us is that we can now just simply add a function to the weapon that is going to be deal damage. So for this, all I need to do is go to my weapon class that we created. So I'm going to go to blueprints and open up base sword. It's time for us to create an event that's just going to be called try deal damage. Okay, so this is going to try to deal damage to things that are within an overlapping sphere. So to do this, what I need to do is right click and type in sphere overlap. And you see that we have a nice option here that says sphere overlap actors. And what this does is this allows us to create a sphere at a given position, and within a radius of it, return all of the actors that it's overlapping. So to do this, I'm going to connect this, and the first thing we need to do is say where the sphere is. And the sphere is going to be located where the sword is. So I'm going to get the sword location, so I'm going to get the world location, and just connect it. Next up, I'm just going to ballpark this and set the sphere radius to say 120. Now it's asking for object types and actors to ignore. So I know the object types that I want, and I can type in make array, and it will actually let me just add anything I want to this. And in this instance, the only thing I actually want to hit are pawns. But I don't want to hit myself. That's bad. So I'm going to get the actors to ignore, and I'm going to make an array. So to go further than this, what I need to do is tell it to ignore myself. But how do I tell the sword to ignore the thing that's holding it? There's a little trick to that. What we can actually do is we can get the scene root, which is the base, and I can get the scene root, I can type in get attach parent, which gets me the thing it's attached to. And since I know it's attached to the player, I can then call get owner. And this will actually return a reference to the player itself. So this gets a scene component, and this returns the actor that is the owner of that scene component. So from here, we're now going to be overlapping and creating something that's going to be returning, in theory, whatever my sword is over. All I need to do from here is go to the output actors, and for each actor that's being overlapped in this instance, I need to simply apply damage. So we could do point damage, but in this instance, I'm just going to apply general damage because it's simpler. And the amount of damage I'm going to apply per hit is going to say, let's do 50 damage. compile, save. Now the next thing that we need to add here is what happens when we actually receive damage. So I can do that really quickly by going to my character base, and I can right click and hit event damage, and you'll notice that there's already functions that we can create that are what happens when we receive damage. So I'm just going to go event any damage, and it's at this time that I'm going to create a variable that is going to be called health, and I'm going to set the health to be 100 by default. And all I'm going to do here is rather simple. I'm going to drag the health in, and I'm going to say health subtract the amount of damage that's being dealt is the new health. And if this value, this new health, is less than or equal to 0, I'm going to play anim montage. I'm going to play an anim montage, and it's going to be a death anim montage. So I'm going to quickly create that by going to my content browser. I'm going to go to Assets, Night, and we have a death anim that we can play, which is just here, play a death. I'm just going to go create anim montage, and I'm just going to call this player death. So back in this, back in the character, I'm going to set this to be the death one, and I'm going to make sure that this death animation montage that we just added is set to play in the correct slot. So at the moment, this is what it's going to do. It's going to play through like this. What I want to do is I want to make sure that first off, we don't bother blending out. So I'm going to set that to 0. And next up, I'm going to make sure that the asset itself is going to play through, and at the end of it, we're going to die. But I need to make sure that it's playing in the full body slot that we created earlier. So I'm going to hit save. And now in the character base, I'm going to just set this up really quickly to say play the death. That's going to play in the full body slot by default. Now this value that gets returned from a montage is actually the duration of the montage. And what's interesting about that is that if I type in delay and set it to the amount of time that's going to last for, and then destroy actor, we've theoretically got an entire combat chain now that will work. So the last step that we need to do to get this working is to make sure that weapon actually calls try deal damage. So I'm going to plug that in just here inside the animation blueprint. And now when I hit play, now at the moment there's a bit of an issue that we're destroying the player, we're not destroying the sword, and in addition to that, she can die multiple times, which is bad. So you can see that when I swipe through, she's just falling over. So let's quickly set that up to correctly work. All I need to do is, so at the moment this chain in any damage is automatically going through. I forgot to add the branch. So when I did this, I needed to drag off that and say if it's less than or equal to 0, and that's true, that's going to deal damage and she'll die. And I want to make sure that this function, this death animation, is only called once. So I'm going to type in do once, do once, and I'm going to add that. So now she'll only ever die once. The other thing that I need to do is I need to stop the movement. So stop movement immediately is a thing that I can call here. And if I want to, I can actually disable the movement component entirely. So disable movement is another option. So I'm going to get that, and I'm going to call that before the delay, because we want her to not run around and do anything. Now this will instantaneously vary it out, and this sets it to none. So we don't need stop movement immediately. We can just straight up use disable movement. And the final thing I'm going to do before this is all over is I'm not just going to destroy the actor, I'm also going to get a reference to the weapon, and I'm going to call destroy on that as well. So I'm going to destroy both my weapon and myself. That way everything disappears. Compile, save, play, and now I'm going to run up and just test it out. 1, 2, she falls over and then she disappears. And everything is good. So that's all it took to get fully working functionality in there for combat. And now it's time to actually set it up so that the enemy can do the same.